Yes, the second-degree Hutchinson amendment to the Inhofe amendment is pending.
All right, thank you. Let me just confine my remarks for a few minutes on how I see where we are from my perspective, and my hope is that I can offer some amendments, at least get them pending, and then discuss with the chairman. I just discussed them with the ranking member with the disposition of those. I wonder if the chairman has any comments on that.
I will be objecting to your amendments because you have objected to the pending amendments, and there will be no reason to add more unless you lift your objection.
I told him I would be happy.
I'm very happy to listen to what you have to say.
All right, then I'll be happy. I told Senator Leahy last night I would be happy to lift my objection once my amendments were pending, and we could have a debate on his non-germane amendment.
I think that the order has to be reversed.
If the chairman will assure me that I'll have the opportunity to, number one, debate Senator Leahy's amendment.
I can't assure that at this point. We have not arrived.
And I will continue with my objection. And
you have amendments that you wish to offer. I think 5. I'm constrained to object to them.
Well, it's interesting. We have a non-germane amendment that is outside the bounds of the Constitution, doing something that's not the role of the federal government, that we're going to expand the cost at a time when we're bankrupt, and 5 germane amendments that actually lower the cost of the Airport Improvement Fund, actually help next generation in terms of money, help preserve the Airport Trust Fund, and we're not going to be allowed to bring them up. And if that's the way we're going to operate, then you can count on me knowing procedure around here that we will have a very difficult time moving ever to a Leahy amendment. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I came to the floor to discuss what we're trying to do and to be helpful in moving that along. I've now heard that I will not be allowed to offer these amendments or at least bring them up. I'm going to discuss each one of them, and I will object to any unanimous consent moving forward on any area until we have an opportunity, as the Senate tradition is, to have a debate and bring amendments up. If we're not allowed to do that, then I'm sure we're going to start going backwards again. Passing an FAA authorization bill, as the chairman and ranking member have tried to do, is a significant priority for Congress. We have a system of air traffic control that needs to be modernized. We have monies that are putting forward to that. We've not had the oversight, according to the Inspector Generals, that is necessary for those programs. In this bill, we have authorizations for monies that are not priorities for this country at the time we're facing a $1.6 trillion deficit. We have an unemployment rate in excess of 9%, and interest rates are going to rise in the future. And my amendments, which I'm happy to have voted on and voted down, lead us to a path that secures and enhances the Airport Improvement Fund and the Trust Fund, makes common sense that 99% of American people would agree with, excludes Alaska because they are a totally different animal when it comes to essential air services requirements, and will in fact enhance the trust fund. So I'm very sorry that the chairman refuses to allow my amendments to come up, but I will offer them and have him object in total. What has to happen with every program in this country is wasteful spending, low priority spending, and duplicative spending has to be eliminated. And although I think the chairman and ranking member did a fairly good job on this bill, there's areas where we can eliminate wasteful spending, there's areas where we can eliminate duplicative spending, and there's areas where we can say this can't be a priority now given the financial fix that we find ourselves in. During our current budget deficit, the revenues coming into the Airport Trust Fund are lower than expected, and we have this very real need on next-gen development. Congress has to limit somewhere and make a priority next-gen. And I think they've tried to go in that direction, and these amendments will do such a thing. The first amendment I'd like to talk about is the Airport Improvement Federal Cost Share Reduction Amendment. We now have, across this country, money being spent on low-priority projects in airports that have very little traffic or minimal traffic, and we're not spending money on the airports where we have, and for safety, and for the airports where we have the majority of funding, of traffic. We've seen one program in particular where billions of dollars of low-priority projects have been spent. And I would just tell you is if we're ever going to get out of the jam we're in, some common sense has to be applied that we can't do everything that everybody wants. And there's going to have to be some sacrifice in these areas. The whole goal of this First Amendment is to discourage low-priority, wasteful aviation projects that would not be funded by increasing the non-federal cost share to just 25% over 3 years. In other words, it's 5% now, and so it's 95% of the government money, and all we do is over 3 years move it to where you have to pay 25%. It's going to discourage a lot of low-priority projects because the communities or the states have to have a greater participation. There is no program in the federal government that has a grant process and a funding process where the federal government pays 95% other than this program. Not one. So we're encouraging money to be wasted on low-priority projects by maintaining 95% federal funding. And this gives us 3 years to adjust to what 75%, which probably should be 50%, but 75%, given our fiscal issues that we find. When non-primary airports could initially have up to 90% of their airport improvement projects covered by the federal government, in recent years we raised that under Public Law 108-176 to 95%. This is 20% higher than the same cost share for other airports qualifying for this $4 billion program. It's $4 billion a year. And unless you think that I'm too critical, let me give you some examples. 2 flights a day, commercial, non-commercial flights, just 2 private flights a day are the average for Kentucky's Williamsburg-Whitley County Airport. We spent $11 million there to build an airport with a 5,500 lighted runway, a colonial-style terminal with white and hundreds of acres for growth, even doesn't have one airline passenger and averages 2 flights a day. Now tell me, if you ask the average American, should we spend $11 million there, or should we make sure that we can take care of the kids that don't have what they need in this country? Should we spend $11 million there or not borrow another $11 million from the Chinese? Should we spend $11 million there, or should we in fact make sure the Airport Trust Fund has the money to do the high priority projects like large airports or like NextGen? Which one? Which one would the average American think we should do? And lest you think that I'm picking on Kentucky, Halliburton Field in Duncan, Oklahoma got $700,000 for a pilot room and a reception room. We're building for private aviation with taxpayer money, low priority. We're building a nice pilot room and a reception room for the private pilots that fly in there. Now tell me how that's a priority in our country today. That's my own state. We're sending money down a hole because we refuse to make tough choices. And all this amendment does is say, let's move it from 95% over 3 years to 75% so that we don't get the lower priority projects funded because we are too generous with what the federal government contributes. Chairman may not like it, but I bet you the average American thinks it's a pretty smart thing to do, given the state that we're in. You know, all bets are off on the politics of this. I've never been accustomed to playing the politics of it at all. But there are just as many people on the left who think we ought to cut spending as there are on the right. America gets it. The only place that doesn't get it is here. And this doesn't do anything except enhance what can be done for higher priority issues within our aviation community. That's all it does. It's a small, simple step. And by rejecting or not allowing an amendment like this to come forward, what we're saying is We're going to keep kicking the can down the road. We're not going to pay attention to the American public. We're going to hide from the reality that is coming very soon for this country that will undermine. We won't have any money to put into airport improvement programs. We won't have the money to fund a next-gen program. It will become a low-priority program unless we wake up and start doing what the rest of America recognizes we have to, and that's start living within our means. The next amendment is an amendment, it's a bipartisan amendment between the senator from Alaska and myself. It's an earmark rescission amendment. And all it says is the earmarks that have been out there that the money hadn't been spent over 9 years, given 1 year for the agencies to decide whether they think that's so, should be rescinded. It puts $500 million, $500 million at a minimum, back into the public treasury. Now, why would we not want to do that? We got $2.6 million sitting in Atlanta that can't be spent on anything except the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. Why wouldn't we take that $2.6 million back? It was earmarked. It didn't get spent. But it's sitting out there in a hole, and we can reverse this. The estimates are we'll save $1 billion. The conservative estimate at a minimum, $500 million. We're not going to allow this amendment to be considered. We're not going to allow it to be considered. It makes no sense. The next amendment calls on us to sacrifice a little bit. The Essential Air Service program has multiple subsidies where people can easily drive an hour and 20 minutes and get to a regional airport that doesn't require any subsidies. And all this amendment does is move it to 100 miles from where it is today, which is 70. Moves it to 100 miles and said if you're less than 100 miles, you ought to have to not be eligible for us, sometimes to the tune of $400 or $500 per person per flight, to have a subsidized flight when you could drive 70 minutes, 80 minutes, and have access to a ton of flights. Again, it's priority. Is it priority for us to continue to spend money on a small group of airports, 36, that in no way pay for themselves, that are readily accessible throughout the country to major airports, and spend the kind of money that we're spending? Another amendment says that if you have less than 10 enplanements a day, maybe we ought to rethink about whether or not we're subsidizing essential air service. So there's two amendments on essential air service. All they're saying is, will we make the tough decisions? We can't do everything we want to do. Is it nice that we have an essential air service program so some people don't have to drive an hour? I guess so. What are we willing to sacrifice to get our house in order? And so these are little bitty amendments, but will send a wonderful signal to the American public is that we get it. We absolutely get it. And that because we get it, we're going to make choices about priorities. We're going to enhance the Airport Trust Fund. We're going to enhance the Airport Improvement Program because we're going to take lower priorities off the board, which is exactly what they want us to do. They want us to focus on the big things, the important things, and they want us to cut the spending that's not absolutely necessary. And I can tell you it's not absolutely necessary that we subsidize to the tune some of these smaller areas that are very close to regional airports or have less than 10 passengers a day. It's not absolutely. So will we ask some Americans to sacrifice? Yeah. But you know what's going to happen? We're all going to have to sacrifice before we get through this. The problem is the resistance in this chamber and in this city is that we don't want to. We don't want to make the hard choices. So it's disappointing that we've not done that. We're going to have to do that. And we're either going to do it or somebody from the outside is going to tell us what we're going to do. And then a fifth amendment, and I know that the chairman will be against this amendment because it's his program that I'm trying to eliminate. But in the year 2000, we created another program called the Small Community Air Services Program, and this is an amendment to repeal that. It was geared to help smaller communities to enhance their air service in addition to essential air service. In other words, to make it more effective, to try to promote the utilization, which is a good idea, except it's not working. And when we see the funds from this program after the grant's over, you know what happens? Airlines leave. They don't stay, they leave. So we're just kind of spending money in a market that won't sustain what we're trying to put there, and then we're putting more money on top of it to try to promote it, and when it doesn't work, what happens is we lose the essential air service anyhow. And it's happened in Oklahoma. The other thing I would tell you is that in this day and time that we live, we have to have an FAA bill. We can't continue to not have an FAA bill. So even if my amendments are voted down, considering that they're going to get a vote, I'll probably support this bill. But it should be noted that we haven't gone far enough. And we haven't made all the tough choices that we need to make. And I'm highly disturbed that we take amendments that are absolutely germane and say they can't be offered because a time agreement, even though it's been agreed to, isn't agreed to yet in terms of the formal, because the senator from Vermont isn't on the floor. We can't offer amendments. So I'm going to offer the amendments and let the chairman object, and then I'll utilize the procedures that are available to me as a member of the Senate as I do that. I'd like the unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, call up amendment number 91.
Is there an objection?
There is objection.
Senator from West Virginia.
And I would
objection is heard.
I would say to the senator from Oklahoma, most of the pending amendments, which are now pending, have been objected to from your side of the aisle. And I don't have any objection to looking at some of your amendments and seeing if we can vote on them. But I can't do that right now. Obviously can't give you any kind of consent right now. And, you know, it's a very difficult situation. I mean, if there's a sort of rolling veto type situation, if objection is made, we can't have votes on amendments which are pending. And, you know, I am willing to look at what you have suggested. As you talk through some of them, they sort of stung pretty hard in my state of West Virginia. But I'm willing to look at it, but I can't do that without consent from folks on my side. So for the time being, I object.
Objection is heard.
Well, I thank the chairman, but I'm going to go on and ask for the request and allow him to object to the further amendments that I have, so it'll be in the record that I did attempt to offer them. I'd ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, call up amendment number 80.
I object.
I'd ask
objection is heard.
Unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, call up amendment number 81.
I object.
Objection is heard.
I'd ask unanimous consent to call up amendment number 82 and set the pending amendment aside.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Well, I thank the chairman for his words. I will take him at his word, and I will work with him and allow him to look at some of these. There's only 2 airports in West Virginia that this would have an impact on. Both of them are less than 75 miles from a regional airport, and they both have minimal employments daily. Minimal. They're over 10, but not far over that. So the point is we ought to help who we can help, and it ought to make economic sense that we should do it, and they're not targeted because there's 36 airports in here that actually the average American would say, it's nuts to spend the kind of money we are. So I thank you for the time, and I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.